And we've arrived to the last tutorial of the series, which is about styled components. Yeah. All right, let's get the enthusiasm up a little bit. This is not the last tutorial series I'm gonna make. I plan on doing much more in the future. Until then, we still have this last library to steal, and that is styled components. Now, lately CSS-in-JS as a styling paradigm has become pretty popular, and styled components is one of the most popular libraries used in this paradigm and in React applications. Now, personally, I don't really like CSS-in-JS. I prefer CSS modules, Sass, and BEM notation for my classes. But you know what? Since it's pretty popular and it's out there, you will stumble upon it at one point or another. I think it's a good idea to steal it so that we can see how it works. All right, this being said, let's jump into the code and not into the code first, let's jump into their docs first and see what CSS-in-JS and style components is all about. So here on their official page, we have here a demo, and you see in the render method, they're rendering a button, 2 buttons, right? We're familiar with this regular React code. What's interesting is that they don't have any classes or something like that added to them, all right? So how are they styled then? Well, they're styled here at the top. You see, the button, which is a custom component, is created by this styled call. So we say, okay, we want to create an anchor tag, an A tag, and then we want this anchor tag to have all this CSS right here, right? Display line, block, border radius, so on, so on. Then based on some props, we want it to either be white or not white, so it's one of those. And basically, this way we're saying, okay, I want you to give me a component which is an anchor tag and which is styled like this. Now, I'm gonna be honest, it's a little bit weird they named this button. It's kind of confusing, you know, like they're styling an anchor tag and calling it a button. But whatever, we'll just go with it. So yeah, we can, and here then this button will have the styles connected to it. What happens behind the scenes is this. For the styles, style components, the style components library creates a unique class name, which is like a hash, and then it appends it in the head when you need that component. So whenever you're using a component, before it's actually, you know, inserted in the DOM and actually we can see it, the styles are going to be appended in head, and that way the component is going to be styled as we want it. Now, there are a lot of discussions whether this CSS-in-JS approach is good, is bad, what are the trade-offs, and so on. I don't want to get into all of that, so we're not going to discuss if you should use or not CSS-in-JS. We're just going to implement it and see how it would work behind the scenes so we can understand and we can see it's not that big of a deal. Now, this being said, I have right here in Visual Studio Code, I just bootstrapped a new project using the first library, the first package we've stolen, create React app. So just go ahead and create a new React application. And then I'm gonna go ahead and I wanna make some modifications. So here in source, I wanna delete app.css. I wanna delete index.css. Let me remove those imports from here because we don't need them. And then I'm gonna delete everything from app, and I'm gonna go in the GitHub repo of this tutorial series, and we're gonna do, in this tutorial, we're gonna do first the basic styling and extending the styles. So I'm just gonna copy all of this, put it here, and now we don't wanna render, we just wanna return a new component. So let's say function app, return this thing, and export default app. Now this won't work because it doesn't know who styled this. We don't need the React DOM import. This one we should comment it, and let's not comment it. First, let me just change the import style components, and we're gonna create a file here in source styled components.js. Now, cool. So we want to somehow create custom components. which is an h1 and a section with those styles, and then append them into the DOM. Now, looking at the import, we see we're importing directly like this. So style component needs to export default styled, and we haven't declared it. And since we're using it like we're using this dot syntax, my first idea is, okay, let's make it an object. So I'm going to go ahead and say let styled equals an object. And yeah, actually, I think I should say what this is. So you might wonder, you might look at this and be like, all right, what the hell? Like, what the hell is this thing? Like, I mean, this looks like I'm getting a property of an object, but then this backticks, this looks like template literals, like what is going on here? Well, I think you're familiar with the normal template literals. So like when I have a string, I can do hello, my name is, and then name, instead of doing, you know, instead of doing hello, my name is, and then plus name plus something else, right? We can insert bits of code, and when we create a string, well, this tagged template literal is similar, but we have kind of a function, right? We have more control over it. We're gonna have a function which returns a string, and we're gonna see right now what parameters they get and how we're gonna use it. Now, to be honest, why they decided to go with this approach, yeah, I'm not really sure, to be honest. I think it could have been done with regular functions, but I guess this is, you know, easier to read instead of passing all that string to a function and so on. So that might be one approach, but we'll see. Tagged template literals are actually functions. So let me just go ahead to convince you. We're gonna go here, we're gonna put h1, right, which needs to be a function, and we're gonna put section. I'm putting those two because those are the elements we're creating. And let me just put here arguments, and let's just console log arguments for the h1, right? And I'm gonna, let me comment the wrapper, let me comment all this code because we're not gonna use it, and then let me here just return dummy text so we have something in our page, and then run npm start. And by the time it runs, if I go here and go localhost 8080, it failed, cannot find styled components. Yeah, it's in this path. No, it's in this. Okay, we got the relative, the dummy text, and we have here the console log, which is an array with an array. But let me just, yeah, it's okay. So the first parameter, and we're only receiving one parameter for now. The first parameter is an array of strings. So maybe to convince you, let's just go ahead and call the first one strings. And you see we got an array with one value, and what's its value is exactly the string we put right here, right? It's exactly this string. Now you might be wondering and say, well, this doesn't really make a lot of sense. Why would we have that? Well, because we could do something like this, right? So maybe depending on, we can do something like this, right? Background red. This is totally legit code. Now when we refresh it, we see we have strings has now two parameters. The first one and then the last one, which is just the semicolon. Let me put something after it so you get the point. Font weight. Come on, keyboard. All right, font weight bold. So you see we have some text, and then the next text is the one, yes, you've guessed it, after our template literal. So we have the text before, first parameter, the first one in the array, template, a literal, the text after it. And if we had this one again, right, font weight normal, we should have, right, 3 elements, all the strings in between. Now, this function also will get another, we'll get the rest of the parameters, and I just want to use the rest operator to put them all together. And here, if I also output the rest, we should see something very interesting. We actually get, so the first parameter is an array, and then we get all the stuff we put in between. For now, they are strings, right? So we get what's in our template literals right here, right? I could also put maybe something like this. If date.now is maybe it's divisible by 2, then I want to have background red, otherwise I want to have background green. So now if I go here, we should see background red, and if I refresh it again, oh, okay, now it's background green because the number of milliseconds is divisible by 2. So again, the first parameter, an array of strings, all the strings written as like strings in between, and then the second parameter, I'm actually using the rest operator because they would come one after another. I want to put them all in an array and get all the values in between, right? So they compute this one, it computes the date.now and says, okay, it's background red or is it green, and so on and so on. So this is the idea with this function, right? And section would work the same thing. And this is the idea behind tagged template literals, in which we can, right? We use a template literal, but in a function, and then we have even more control over what we want to do. Cool. This being said, what does this function need to return? Well, it needs to return a React component, right? So let me just go here and let's just do the H1 first, return, and it's a React component. We got the props, and here I want to maybe return React.createElement. And what element am I creating? An H1, because I'm in that function, and I'm going to pass the props. Let's import React from React. Let's do the same thing here, right? String and rest. Now, again, we're going to have some duplicate code in the beginning, but I'm trying to make this tutorial like a ladder, you know? We're going to move one step up, so we're going to take it step by step slowly, and we're going to get at the end where we're going to have no duplicate code and the code is going to look good. So if it looks pretty shitty for now, just bear with me, it's going to get better. And here I want to, now coming back, I want to render a section. Cool, and now pretty much I think I could uncomment this one. Let me just delete all the code I wrote, and let's put those components, and we should see them in the page, and we're right, we see them. And if we inspect, we got a section and an H1. Cool, so we rendered them, but we're not styling them. Again, the idea with the style is like this. For each element, create a unique, I mean, not for each element, for each type of styled element, because I may use multiple title elements in my app. I don't want to have each of them to have a unique class, but I want all title elements to have the same class, which is going to be a hash so that we don't have conflicts. And then in that class, I'm going to put all those rules. This is how styled components work. So to have the classes and to actually add them in the DOM, we're going to need a style element. So let me just go ahead and say here, const style element is document create element. And we're going to put this one style, right? And let's add an attribute to it so we can see it easily. Set attribute data styled components true, and let's append it to head. Append child style element. This is where we're gonna in this style element we're gonna put all our CSS rules. Now, what do we want to do here? Well, we want to first let's compute the class name, but before the class name, let's compute the CSS properties. So I'm gonna go ahead and say CSS props is equal to, and for now in this example we don't have any, we just have the strings, we don't have any template literals in between. So let's just go ahead and say strings dot join this one. Now the class name, CSS class name, now I want this one to be unique, and I'm going to use a package, and let me just install it right here, npm install crypto.js. While this one installs, you know, I'm not sure if this is the best package to go with. I just want a package to take a hash, to take a string and generate a unique hash for me. Why am I generating a unique hash from a string and not just a unique, you know, string from nothing? Well, I'm thinking maybe you got the same rules. So maybe you're using, you know, a button and an anchor tag. Maybe they both have like the red, color red, and that's it. Now, instead of having, two classes in head with the same rule, I just want both of them to use the same class. So that's why, based on the CSS properties of that element, we're gonna create a unique class. And if those same properties repeat themselves, the class name is gonna be the same. So we're not gonna generate any new classes. Now let me just import here, I think this is the name from crypto.js / this one. And let's just put the class name. I'm gonna put it SHA, I think this is an hashing algorithm from CSS props. And then this one is going to generate a pretty long hash, but I want to convert it to string first of all, and then I want to do only 8 characters, so our classes look so that our HTML is not really horrible and we're not generating huge classes. 8 characters should be enough. So we're generating the class name, and then let's add this one to our element. So here we could go ahead and say props, and then class name, come on, is CSS class name. And let me just copy paste this one because we want it to be the same. Let's refresh the page, and we see we got a class name on our h1, and we got 2 h1s. Okay, I think, right, because we copy pasted in section. Here it should say section. So we go ahead and say we have the root, we have the section with a class, we have the h1 with a different class, right? Because they have different styles. Now, the first problem here is, first of all, the classes start with a number. That's not okay with CSS. So let me just go ahead and make sure all our classes start with the styled word. And let me just copy paste this one here. Just refresh. Okay, style. That's good. Cool. So we get the CSS properties. We're generating a unique hash from them. That way, if we have the same properties in different elements, we're going to have the same hash, the same class name. We don't need to create any other classes. But now the only thing that's left is to insert those rules in our head. So I just want to go ahead here and say, maybe I'm going to make a function at the bottom. Say, let's put here functions. All right, and say function append CSS, which is going to have a class name and some CSS props. And let's just go ahead and say this: style element dot inner HTML plus equals, what's the syntax, dot class name, and then we open those up and say CSS props. All right, and then I want to go ahead here and say append CSS of CSS class name and CSS props. Copy paste this one, put it here as well. All right, let's see. And you see already it refreshed and it worked. We have our header, our heading is styled, our section is styled. Now, let's just add multiple headers because there's a problem with the way we did things. So we're adding multiple headers. They all have the same class name, which is great. And the problem is here in head, in style, you see we have the rules for the header class. They're repeated 3 times, which sucks, right? It sucks. So I want to change my append CSS function to only append it if it doesn't exist. So we're going to put if something, we're going to return, and we're going to say console info maybe. Trying to insert a class already inserted, and we're going to return, and otherwise I want to insert it. And to keep track of the classes we've added, I'm going to make here another element, const inserted classes, and I'm going to put it at an empty object. And basically, whenever we're inserting a class, we're going to add a property on this object with the class name. We're going to put its, so basically this object is going to keep track of what classes we've added. And for each class, we're going to have a property with that class name and its value true. And before we add, we just look, hey, does this object have the key called like this class name? If it does, we just return. If it doesn't, we add it and append it in head. So here we can say inserted classes of class name. So if it's already existed, we just log it. Otherwise, we set it to true and we insert it in head. And now if we refresh the page and we go in head, we see we just have 2 styles, which is great. Now let's check one more thing. If I go here and I don't use any h1 elements, you see our style element only has the style for our section, which is great, right? This is what we want. It doesn't have the style for all the styled elements in our application, which will be hundreds, thousands of them. It just have the styles dynamically inserted of the elements we're actually going to use, which is sweet. Right, now moving back here, so this code kind of works, but we have one big problem with it. We actually have kind of 2 problems with it, but let's just take it one by one. The first one is that now we've hard-coded h1 and section, right? Which is bad. Now, we want you to be able to create any element you want, like any tag you want and any tag that exists. And one way to do this would be here to have all the valid HTML tags, a function for each of them. Which would be, in my opinion, a really terrible solution because the HTML standard is always evolving. So in the future, you're going to have new elements which don't exist now. So we're always going to have to keep track, okay, come back in this library, add this tag and this tag, because in HTML version from 2025, we're going to have those new elements. So I don't want to keep getting back here and, checking the HTML standard and all this stuff. Instead, I'm going to trust the developer. I want to be able to, whatever the developer puts right here, right? So maybe he puts styled.h1, which is okay, style.section, still okay, style.button, still okay. I want basically to trust him. Whatever he puts after the dot, I'm going to create an element with that tag. Of course, the problem is if he has a typo, if he uses an element which doesn't exist, like this one, it's still going to create it in HTML. But I think this is okay because it's like the developer's job to make sure he creates elements which actually exist. So yeah, the sweet spot would be this. We just have one function and we dynamically create an element based on what element the developer wants, and we don't care. Maybe it's a valid one, maybe it's not a valid one. I don't care, I'm just going to create it. Now, how are we going to do this? Because I want to somehow intercept all those calls and lead all of them to a function. And the only way we can do this is with a feature which arrived in ES6, I think. And that's called proxies. And let me tell you, proxies are amazing. So basically we got normal objects, as you know, and then we create a proxy object, which is like taking our normal object and adding some features onto it, like some superpowers, right? So I'm a normal human, but then I take this drink, which is the proxy, and now I can fly. Maybe I can fly just 2 hours each night, but still, it's an enhancement to my human abilities, which I didn't have before. This is what proxy does, right? We take an object and we enhance it with some stuff you're gonna see, and we kind of give it some superpowers, which is great. So the syntax is this. We want to, here instead of exporting the style, I want to say like this: export default new proxy. And the first parameter is the target object. So what object I want to enhance? I'm just going to get an empty object. And then here I'm going to have the handler, which is another object. So this is how we customize what we want to do. And what I want to do is this: whenever you're getting a new property in this style right here, .h1, .section, whatever, I want to return to you a function which creates a React component of that tag, right? So I kind of want to hook into, like, listen to getters, kind of like that. So I'm going to say here, whenever you're trying to get something, and the first parameter is the target, in our case is going to be this empty object, but we don't really care about it. And the second one is going to be the property, what you're trying to get, either h1, section, and so on. And here I want to do return this function right? And the only different, and this is how we dynamically create it, instead of hard coding here an h1, we put prop. And let me just delete all this. And here we should have an arrow function. All right, so instead of exporting a normal object, I'm exporting a proxy over a normal object. We're enhancing it. Now, whenever somebody's getting a property, right, I'm going to return a function. So you're going to use styled dot the tag name and then the tagged template literal, which is like a function call. So I'm going to return a function with the strings, with the rest. We're going to do everything we did before. But the only difference is here at the end when I'm creating the actual React element. I don't want to create an h1 or a section. I want to create one based on what property you're trying to access. So now let's just take a look here. Our codes should still work, right? This is good news. And now I should be able to do something like this. Maybe button, styled.button. And maybe background black, color white, and let's put the button right here. Let's just put type button, click me. And you see we got it, right? We have the button styled, we look at the tag, it's using the button tag and it's passing the props and so on, which is great. Now let's try with something which is wrong. So style.btn. And you see, it actually rendered like a BTN element, which of course is not valid. And again, this is the developer's job. So by using proxies, we're basically dynamically creating elements. We don't need to hard code things, which I think is extremely, extremely good. Now, one more thing before we end this video is I want to also have support for this thing. Maybe here I'm putting, right? Let's put this one. Date not now. Let's just keep the code we had before. Then I want to say background green, otherwise background red. Now, if I refresh this one, you see my H1, let me just comment the button because it's kind of annoying where it is. Or actually, let's change it to a real button. So you see now my H1s don't have any background. So this code doesn't do anything because we're not doing anything with the rest parameter, right? This is where the rest of our stuff comes in. So here I have CSS props, and instead of doing this, I want to kind of compute it, right? I want to put first a string from here, and then the value from rest, and then from here, and so on. So let me just create a function. Let CSS props is compute CSS props of strings and rest. I'm gonna go here and say function compute CSS props strings rest. And I want to go ahead and say like this. We got the result, which is a string, and then I'm gonna go ahead and say strings.for each. We got the string and the index result. We're gonna append it to our result, and then we want to say append rest of index, and then return our result. All right, so here now if I use CSS props, compute it, and just leave it like this, let's refresh and see if it works. I think we're gonna have some bugs here. No, nothing. So compute CSS props of strings and rect. We're gonna we're gonna return our result, and we're gonna have the class name, and here we have date.now background green, background red. Let's not forget the semicolon. Oh yeah, it was a semicolon. It works, right? We got it. It's green, now it's red, green, green. Let's hope for, I'm still refreshing the page, okay, red, and so on. So now we can dynamically change it based on some, some outside stuff, or maybe based on some object props. Cool. So tagged template literals behave like functions, proxy object, so we don't, so that we can create any element the developer wants dynamically, and then we create a class name, a unique one, using the SHA-256 algorithm. We append it into head in this append CSS function if it's not already appended, and we return a new React component. Now, this is great so far. So yeah, I think I'm gonna stop the video here. And now what we have basically is this first example on the GitHub of the StealLikeADev. So I'm gonna stop this video right here, and in the next one we're gonna have our CSS be adaptable by props, right? As you see here, maybe this is an interesting one. Based on the props of the React component, if it's primary, then we give it some different styles. But we're gonna talk about it in the next video. So see you there. Have a great day.